everyone. Thanks for your patience. We're about to get started, and I'd like to hope everybody gets settled. Take some seats if you like, stand if you like, and I'd like to introduce our MC, Tony Grimm.
Thank you, thank you. Before I start, I'd like to recognize Mr. History of Berks County, George Miser. George, where are you? There he is right there. George, glad to have you here. George is quite a character. He used to tell me back in my days when I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, he would walk up the street if a building was being torn down. He would rummage through the garbage to pick out ledgers and things like that. That man knows more about Berks County than most people forget. George, glad to have you here. I'd just like to say again, welcome everybody. I'm retired president of the Berks County Chamber. It's been a long time, but I've been involved in the community. I've been president of the Berks County, or not Berks County, but the Baird Ornithological Club, the local bird club, and that's why we're here this morning. And just a quick story, how did I get involved in this plaque? Well, Bill Urich, who's a member of the club and the past president of the club, wrote several articles in the paper about it over the years, and nobody could find this plaque. When I became president, they challenged me to get that plaque. And so I immediately met with my old cohort, Donna Reed, who worked for me at the chamber. And over a 2-year period, they searched the city, couldn't find it. And then the Baird Association, or the Baird Bird Club, and the city partnered to get this plaque, but it took 2 years and 25. So we're glad it happened. Will you please rise with me and pledge allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to start off with a special welcome to our very special guest and keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Richard Curran, the Smithsonian Distinguished Scholar and Ambassador at Large. He's the first person so designated in the 171-year history of the institution. I'd also like to recognize the new president of the Baird Club, Dr. Lucy Cairns. Lucy is right over here. Thanks, Lucy, for coming. Also joining us today is State Senator. Wait for that. Okay, always something happening in the city. Senator Judy Schwank, Berks County Commissioner Mike Rivera, Honorable Madeline Fudeman, Berks County Court Police Judge Reading Mayor Eddie Moran, sitting over here. Council President Jeff Waltman, somewhere in the audience, and Marcia Goodman-Hinnerschitz is over here. Councilwoman Donna Reed and Johnny Cepeda Freitas, I hope I pronounced that right. Reading School Superintendent Dr. Jennifer Murray, Berks County Bar Association President Justin D. Border, and Executive Director Corey Walter. Nicole Manley, President of the Justice William Strong Americans Inn, I'm really messing that up, of Court in Center Park. Executive Director Mike Lauder. Sorry about that. Okay, special thanks to the City of Reading Public Works Department who set up our protection over here, because you never know how fast they're going to come down. When we were here last week, they had knocked a pole down. So we were really worried about this ceremony today and our pole over here. Oh, thanks. Special thanks to Amy Johnson, who really helped us out a lot. She's the preservation specialist and communications director. Christian Crespo, a man who's going places in the city of Reading. Managing Director Abe Amoros, and most especially Alan Schumann. Alan, where are you? Hold your hand up so people can see you. He's CEO of the Schumann Development Group for providing this great space for us and the reception later in the Abe Lincoln following the unveiling of our two markers, this one here and one over by the church. Now on to the ceremony. We're standing or sitting somewhat on somewhat hollowed historical ground in this block, anchored by 18th century Christ Episcopal Church and this office building right here. The efforts of two men in the same century would lead one, Spencer Fullerton Baird, to become the second secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, and the other, William Strong, to the bench of the United States Supreme Court. So two very important people from the city of Reading. I'd like to ask Reverend Douglas Moyer now from Christ Episcopal Church to offer a special prayer. Reverend?
Thank you. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, creator of the universe with all its marvelous order, and this world, our island home, with all its infinite complexity of living creatures. Give us the wisdom to follow in the footsteps of your servant Spencer Fullerton Baird, that we too may appreciate your creation more fully and therefore come to know you more truly. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Next up is Attorney Brian Engelhart, a Berks County historian and author, who will be speaking on behalf of the Bar Association and talking about William Strong.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
The lady that owns the strings to my puppy.
I jumped the gun. I jumped the gun. Next speaker, the Mayor of Reading.
Good morning, everyone. What a beautiful day it is here in the city of Reading. Mother Nature really wanted to give us a gift, another gift. I want to thank each and every one, first of all, for coming. Today I join all of you to recognize a notable resident of the city of Reading. Spencer Fullerton Baird not only loved nature, but he also loved history. In 1850, he became the first curator of the Smithsonian Institution and the permanent secretary for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He even filled 2 railroad box carts of natural history items to Washington, D.C. In 1871, President Grant appointed Mr. Baird as the first commissioner of fish and fisheries for the United States Fish Commission, where he served until he died in 1887. In 1878, he became the second secretary of Smithsonian, where he was allowed to live rent-free in the building, but he refused. Instead, he turned that area into a workplace. Today, we are honored and pleased to have Dr. Richard Curran, Smithsonian Distinguished Scholar and Ambassador at Large, to help us dedicate this historical marker. Thank you again, sir. We hope you enjoy your stay here in the city of Reading and that you return soon, Dr. Curran. We were waiting for you with open arms. Recognizing notable residents of Reading is not only admirable, but also necessary. It demonstrates to the region, the Commonwealth, and the nation that Reading has made significant contribution to society. We currently have more than 20 historical markers of principal individuals. Their contributions would never be forgotten here in the city. I would also like to thank all of the organizers of this amazing event. They have worked tirelessly to make this day a success, and I hope that the current and future generation of people of all ages stop, pause, and reflect on the significance of Mr. Baird's contribution to one of the finest historical, natural, and cultural institutions in the world. Much planning and thought went into this event, to say the least. and you should all feel proud to get this past the finish line. Thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Next is Brian Engelhart, who's going to be speaking for the Bar Association. Tell us a little bit about Mr. Strong.
The second time's the charm. All right. Okay, William Strong was the second member of the Berks County Bar to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Who knows the first member? Oh, no. Yeah, all right. James Wilson. Yes, the Declaration of Independence. So anyway, there. Those of you keeping score at home, we wanted to get the facts straight. Judge Fudeman is here. Justin Boder, the president of the Bar Association. Corey Walter, our executive director. And Nicole Manley, president of the William Strong American Inns of Court, which was formed years ago by senior retired Judge Linda Ludgate. It's a great organization. My father said, blessed are the brief, so they shall be heard. So on we go. Let's learn about Judge Strong. He was born in 1808 in Somers, Connecticut. So he didn't go to high school anywhere around here. He graduated Yale College in 1828, and on he goes to New Jersey, the logical place, Burlington, where he teaches math and classics for a few years in order to pay for the roof over his head, and also reads the law under a politically notable attorney, Garrick Mallory. Then he goes to Yale Law School for 6 months, passes the bar in Philadelphia, and what does he do? Comes here to to Reading. Okay, so he sets up practice. Reading at that time is about 5,000 people. The canals were working, the railroad wasn't working yet. Everybody speaks German, Pennsylvania German. Well, if you want to have clients, you got to learn a language. So he was proficient in Pennsylvania Dutch, had a branch office in Kutztown, and so it is said that once a week he would walk to Kutztown to his branch office and then walk back, which he is never smiling in any picture you see. That probably is the reason. Anyway, in the process, my father also used to say, if you can't first succeed, marry the boss's daughter. 4 years after he comes to Reading, he marries the daughter of the president judge. All right. And 3 children they have. Unfortunately, she passes on after 8 years. He remarries a few years later and has 4 children. The president's judge was Garrick Mallory, also for you keeping score at home. So he's successful when he's here. He's in a lot of groups. He's in a Presbyterian organization. He's the first council of the Reading Railroad. He's a director of Farmers Banks. He incorporates Charles Evans Cemetery. And then he moves on to Congress for 4 years. 1846, he's elected as a Democrat, but an abolitionist Democrat. And he voted anti-slavery in the big vote on the Wilmot Proviso. You don't know what it is, look it up in Wikipedia. Okay, but he voted anti-slavery. He was a strong supporter of the Union cause. So after he's done 2 terms in Congress, he's back in Reading practicing law. He says, I'm going to become a member of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. He wins as a Democrat, goes to Harrisburg, switches his politics, and that was in 1857. 1868, he decides he's going to follow the money, and he goes to Philadelphia for a very lucrative job in a firm down there. And 2 years later, he gets, not a call, whatever, from Ulysses Grant that says, serve on the Supreme Court of the United States as an Associate Justice, please Judge Strong. And he did. So for 10 years, he was a conservative member of the Supreme Court of the United States. In 1880, he retired. He had all his faculties. He wanted to give an example that it's time to move on when you get to this certain age. And after he retired, he returned to private practice, this time up in New York, not back in Reading. Negotiated a treaty between the United States and Haiti in his spare time, worked for some religious groups very actively, and then died in 1895 and is buried at Charles Evans Cemetery. So that's it for Judge Strong, and thanks for listening. I don't see anybody going to sleep because it's cold and you're all standing up. Have a good day.
Now I'm particularly proud to introduce our very special guest, Dr. Richard Curran, who will speak about Spencer Fullerton Baird. He's the Smithsonian Distinguished Scholar and Ambassador at Large, the first person so designated in the 171-year history of the institution. As a member of the Smithsonian Senior Leadership Team, Dr. Curran focuses on strategic direction, institutional partnerships, public representation, philanthropic support, and special initiatives. Prior to his current role, he served as acting provost and undersecretary for museums and research from 2015 and from 2007 as undersecretary for history, art, and culture. During the preceding 2 decades, he directed the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage with its annual Folklife Festival on the National Mall. Some of you may have attended that. And the Grammy-winning Smithsonian Folkways recordings, working with major cultural figures and grassroots artists across the U.S. and around the world. He also produced major national celebration events associated with the opening of museums and monuments and presidential inaugurals and the Atlanta Olympics. Dr. Curran served on the National Commission for UNESCO and helped draft an international treaty now ratified by 170 nations to safeguard living cultural heritage. He led efforts to save heritage in Haiti after the 2010 earthquakes and has overseen projects for saving heritage endangered by natural disaster in Nepal and the U.S. and by human conflict in Mali, Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. He serves as Smithsonian's liaison to the U.S. President's Committee for the Arts and the Humanities and the White House Historical Association, and is a member of the U.S. Department of State Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee. An anthropologist with a doctorate from the University of Chicago, Dr. Curran specialized in the study of South Asia, conducting years of fieldwork in India and Pakistan. He's held Fulbright and social science research council fellowships. He's taught at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and authored 6 books, including Reflections of a Culture Broker, A View from the Smithsonian, Hope Diamond, The Legendary History of a Cursed Gem, and the best-selling Smithsonian's History of America, 101 Objects. He has been honored by Harvard University, the Peabody Museum, the International Council of Museum, and the American Anthropological Association, the American Folklore Society, and the Cosmos Club. And he is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Why did I read all that? Well, I just wanted to let you know that's the man that really is the power behind the boss at the Smithsonian. With that, Dr. Richard Curran.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you all for being here today. Mayor Moran, it's great to meet you, and thank you for your welcome, and thank you, Jeff and Donna and others for hosting me for dinner last night. Look, it's a great honor for me to be here to honor Spencer Baird, a distinguished son of Reading and one of the most prominent naturalists and museum leaders of the 19th century. As the historical marker notes, he served as Secretary of the Smithsonian, the first Commissioner of Fisheries, and an organizer of the U.S. Geological Survey, and did a lot more. Now, this is really meaningful to me because the mayor mentioned that when you became the Secretary of the Smithsonian, they actually let you live there. So you got to live in a castle. Not many Americans get to live in a castle, but if you're the secretary, you got to live in a castle. And Baird said, no, I don't want to live in a castle, and he turned it into a workspace. That workspace is where I work. I have Spencer Baird's office. And in that office, I go to that office, pre-COVID every day, now a little less. but I have to walk by a statue, and there's a statue of Spencer Baird. He looks like Captain Ahab, that statue. But, you know, every day I live with Spencer Baird. So, quite familiar. In that office where I sit, I look at his desk. Spencer Baird, you know, was bird collector, documenter, and so on. And he had this wooden desk that he ordered from Indiana, like 1881, I think. And I look at that desk, and it has like a grid in it, you know, like you'd find in a post office for sorting envelopes and so on. And for several years, I wondered, like, what the heck did he do with the desk? I mean, he wasn't a postman or something. You know, was it correspondence he was getting? And then I saw a picture, and I realized that, you know, this grid-like pigeonhole desk was actually for pigeons. It was a pigeonhole desk. He would keep birds in those compartments. So, again, I live with Spencer Baird. Now, his interest in birds started as a youth here in Reading, and he'd go on nature walks with his brother, and he got really interested in natural specimens. And as was said by the invocation, he really did appreciate the greatness of creation and the wonders of the natural world. He earned degrees at Dickinson, he taught at Dickinson, but his interest ran from birds to botany to anthropology. People told, I read an old obituary of his where they tell a story when he was a young man. I'm a New Yorker who's loud enough, but not that loud. So Spencer Baird was out in the field digging for Indian artifacts, and there was some workmen around, and they thought this guy was crazy, like he's digging in the mud and the dirt, and he's trying to locate these artifacts. What's he doing? They thought he had escaped from an insane asylum or something. They got a rope to tie him up and turn him in, and instead he gave them a lecture about Native American history and culture. That was Baird. Now, he was really into collecting specimens and objects, and Joseph Henry was a physicist, became the first secretary of the Smithsonian in 1846. And Henry was a theoretical guy, and he was interested in the sun and weather and electricity, and he wasn't so interested in museums or anything. But Congress had another idea. They thought the Smithsonian should develop museums, and Spencer Baird, that was his dream. So as the mayor said, when he came down to Washington to take the job as Joseph Henry's assistant, the first curator, and at that time the assistant secretary, he brought down 2 boxcars loaded with natural history specimens. And that provided really the basis for the Smithsonian's collections that you see today. Anybody ever here been to the Smithsonian in Washington, any of the museums? Probably everybody, okay. The basis of that was those 2 boxcars of stuff that he took back from Pennsylvania. Now, he was interested because he thought we could learn a lot by investigating and examining those specimens. We can learn a lot about the development of life on the planet, about the environment, and ecology. And he had been inspired by Audubon. He had gone to New York. He had learned about avian species, documentation, and so on. But Baird, when he went to the Smithsonian, he really sponsored a lot of young people, you know, what we would call kind of interns today. And so he sponsored people to go all over the place in North America, to the Southwest, to all parts of the country, even to a place called Alaska that was then owned by the Russians. And this was in the 1850s. And it was actually because of Baird's work in sponsoring and sending people to do research on Alaska and its natural resources and collect stuff about Alaska, that when they were debating after the Civil War, Seward's Folly, you know, the idea, should we buy Alaska or not? Nobody had been to Alaska. And so the Senate called Baird to testify and talk about, hey, is Alaska worth it? Is this a folly or not? And Baird Baird had the evidence of Alaska's rich natural resources. So the U.S. approved the purchase, and Alaska became part of the United States. So, Mayor Moran, the next time you meet any official, a governor, or any of those senators from Alaska, you say they owe Reading something. Now, Baird also initiated the Bureau of American Ethnology, hired his friend John Wesley Powell, who's a war hero and explorer, to lead that unit. And it was that group of anthropologists that documented Native people across the country. They documented their practices, their material culture, their songs and stories. And it's really because of Baird's work in starting that Bureau of American Ethnology that today we know a lot more about Native people on this continent than we would have. And it's why many Native people in this country have records of the stories their ancestors told. We know what their languages sound like. And those people can have access to their own history because of the efforts of Spencer Baird. Now, Baird wrote hundreds and hundreds of papers. He communicated with scientists around the world. He started all sorts of exchanges of specimens and scientific work. But his greatest dream was to really have a national museum. And the Smithsonian, when it was first founded by this English guy who never visited the United States but had some faith in us, people across the ocean, like maybe they believed in democracy and knowledge. And, you know, given what had happened with the French Revolution, given class society in England, you know, a people across the ocean who kind of believed like in the power of democracy and the power of knowledge, that was probably a good recipe. So when this English guy, James Smithson, left his money for the United States, it was to found the Smithsonian in Washington for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Well, Baird believed in the increase and diffusion of knowledge, and he believed a museum, public accessibility to knowledge, scientists studying specimens, that would lead to knowledge and a U.S. contribution to the world. So Baird had a great opportunity. In 1876, the United States celebrated its centennial of independence in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, there was a great 100th centennial exhibition. The U.S. government did exhibitions, they built buildings in Philadelphia, and people from around the country, the different states, inventors, commercial firms, all did exhibits. So here was a great, and millions of people visited this. It was like one of the first World's Fairs. Well, Baird had this idea. He said, I need collections for a national museum. Here I have in Philadelphia all this stuff being a technical scientific term. And so he convinced people in Philadelphia. He did great exhibits. He led the exhibits for the government on natural history and our national history. And at that time, they displayed the Star-Spangled Banner and George Washington's sword and Declaration of Independence, all this stuff. And so Baird talked everybody into donating this stuff. Nobody wanted to pack up and take it home. So he talked everybody into donating their material. So remember those 2 boxcars when he first went to Washington? He filled up 62 boxcars, 62 rail cars, tens and tens of thousands of objects, and they come to Washington. Well, they came to Washington. You know, what do you do with them? Where are you going to put them? Well, you need a building. So Baird talked Congress into building the first U.S. National Museum. And that still stands on the mall next to the castle today in Washington, D.C. Now, that quickly expanded. So the species multiplied and multiplied. And they kept acquiring more and more and more. Not all of them were alive. Baird sent out this guy, Hornaday, who was interested in, he was a taxidermist actually, and he wanted to figure out how to stuff buffalo skins that they had. He'd never seen a live buffalo because he came from the East Coast. So he sends out Hornaday to the west to find buffalo. Well, buffalo are extinct. But Hornaday finds some buffalo, doesn't have the heart to shoot them, brings them back to Washington, brings them back to the National Museum, and talks Baird into putting a fence around them, feeding the buffalo, and making them part of the Department of Living Animals, which becomes the National Zoo. and today is a center of conservation for animal species across the planet. So, if you like that those cute pandas at the Smithsonian, if you like the fact that those pandas have been saved from extinction, goes back to Spencer Baird and his work to establish that activity. That building, now known as the Arts and Industry Building, expanded so much the Smithsonian had to build another building, now known as the Natural History Museum on the mall. And that museum now contains 130 million specimens. It's the largest archive of DNA on the planet, the largest sample of species around the world. And it provides untold knowledge to examine evolution on our planet, climate change, even the evolution of viruses and viral spreads, because we get that out of those samples that are in that museum. That's what Spencer Baird. Now, some of the things that ended up with that, he could never have foreseen. So Spencer Baird collects a lot of bird samples, right? Thousands of them. Now that's grown to about 650,000 samples. And there was a woman, Roxy Laybourne, who inherited that office, who takes care of the birds, who decades ago said, you know, we could use these birds because we have something called jet planes, and birds strike the planes, and we don't want that to happen. Remember the miracle on the Hudson, right? And that happens every day. So she started, based on Baird's collection, something called forensic ornithology. Forensic ornithology. And what happens when there's a bird strike anytime in the United States, the FAA sends the remains of that strike to the Smithsonian, where our ornithologists then inspect the remains and figure out, you know, was it Canadian geese? What did it, and what can we do to stop it? That would not have been possible had not Spencer Baird began that bird collection. So it's like, you know, these things that have tremendous consequences. When you're doing something, you don't realize what they're going to bring forth. But Spencer Baird brought forth so much. When he brought those boxcars of stuff from Philadelphia to the National Museum, that then led to other collections, so that the Star Spangled Banner and the Wright Flyer and the rocket ships and the space capsules and the moon rocks all then came to the Smithsonian. So when you go into the American History Museum on the Mall, that all came from Baird's first museum. When you go to the American Art Museum or the National Portrait Gallery, all that came as a result of Baird's work. When you go into the Air and Space Museum, that too came from Baird's work in establishing that national collection. So when you think about all the work that gets done, all the research that's gotten done, all the public, about 30 million visitors a year come to the Smithsonian, again pre-COVID, hopefully post-COVID, and we reach about 1 billion people online. We work with scientists in 165 countries. We work with NASA in outer space. We work with, you know, people doing work on disease, and we document American history. All that comes from this son of Reading. Now, Baird also, as the mayor said, served on the National Academy of Sciences and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He was a member of the Cosmos Club. And in that work, through the National Academy of Sciences, they're the ones that came up with the U.S. Geological Survey to map our country, and document the riches of our natural resources. He started the institute at Woods Hole. Woods Hole is the premier institution for understanding what's happening to oceans. Think about marine geology, marine ecology today in our world, with issues of pollution and the survival of species and the warming of oceans. That all started because of Baird. And so, just before he died, his best friends and colleagues got together at the Cosmos Club, and they ginned up. They said, you know, we need something for more popular education. People are getting more magazines and publications. They dreamed up another idea. That was called the National Geographic Society. So you have this son of Reading, a guy who was born here, who touched so many things and really defined the kind of scientific and public educational framework for our country, from National Geographic to the Smithsonian, to Woods Hole, to the Geological Survey. This was one person. And so, by all accounts, he was a very caring person, a wise person. He was very generous. He wasn't a great public speaker. He wasn't a politician, but he was totally dedicated to what he was doing. He gave opportunities he opened the door for women scientists and women naturalists to go out and do their work nationally at the different agencies and at the Smithsonian. And his best buddy and his lifelong assistant for decades was a guy named Solomon Brown, who was the first African-American employee of the Smithsonian. And when we dedicated the new African-American Museum on the Mall, the boardroom of that museum is named after Solomon Brown, Spencer Baird's trusted assistant, companion for over 40 years. So I suppose, standing here today, for many people who come here, and I think about younger people, they'll probably pass this marker and they'll look at it, something maybe ancient, probably irrelevant, some old guy, carved in a marker or a stone or a statue. And hey, it's an old guy with a beard who lived more than a century ago. And as a 71-year-old guy with a beard, I can kind of identify with that sentiment. But I'd hope that people and younger people who pass by this marker maybe pay a little attention to it and say, hey, you know something? Here was a kid that was born in Reading who took in the wonders of the world, who had some curiosity, discipline, and commitment, and went on to make huge, tremendous contributions to our nation and our world. And it's no small thing that the building he established for the first National Museum in Washington at the Smithsonian now is opened after about 15 years of renovation with a new exhibit called Futures. And that future speaks, I think, to Spencer Baird's vision. I hope Reading's youth and others who come here look at this marker in the future and say, hey, I too can maybe make some contributions in my time. Maybe I too can change our country and the world for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. He was quite a guy. Really makes you feel good about a son of Reading going on to changing the world, really. Last but not least, please welcome Dr. Walter Mashaka, Senior Curator of Natural Sciences for the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission.
Thank you. The state of science is the better for Spencer Fullerton Baird. Each specimen is a first edition book. The collection constitutes a research library. That was quite an introduction, a little late though. Baird understood the scientific value of natural history specimens. He collected, he acquired collections, and he traded specimens. He described more than 50 species of reptiles. As a herpetologist, I'm especially proud. And in turn, at least 18 species were named after him. Needless to say, Pennsylvania should be proud to claim S.F. Baird, and now Pennsylvanians and visitors can, thanks to this marker, be more aware and appreciative of the life and the accomplishments of one of North America's Natural History Museum giants. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Now, the real last but not the least, Bill Urich, author, retired special photographer for the Reading Eagle, photo editor, and past president of the Baird Ornithological Club, Bill Yorick, who's going to give you some really insight into this famous man. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Dr. Curran. And Mayor Moran, the legacy of the Baird family even extends into the mayor's office, as his brother William, whom Dr. Curran talked about, became mayor, was elected mayor in 1855 of Reading. So we have a little extension of the Baird family even today to the mayor's office. But this is the culminating event for the 100th anniversary of the Baird Ornithological Club, which was founded in 1921. And it hasn't been easy spending 100 years with a name like the Baird Ornithological Club. People get frightened of that name. People get confused by that name. For instance, we might be up on Mount Penn at the pagoda doing a hawk watch, and somebody would go, "What are you guys up to?" And we'll say, "Well, we're the Baird Club, and we're watching hawks." And they look at us and go, "Are you speaking with a Boston accent or something?" I said, no, it's, yeah. They say, are you a bird club? And I said, yeah, we're the Baird Bird Club. And then they go, walking away. I mean, it could be worse. Baird could have been born into the southern Berks County iron-making family after whom Birdsboro was named, William Baird, and we would have been the Baird Ornithological Club. A little redundant, but you know, you can see how that would have played out. We'd be up at Lake Onalani looking over some waterfowl, and somebody comes up and goes, "Is this a bird club or something?" And we'd have to go, "Well, we're the Bird Club, but we're not really named for anything like birds. We're named after a guy named Baird, and we're actually the Bird Club." We would have 0 members if that were the case. But the great thing about what Spencer Fullerton Baird has done, and we see here that we're standing on the shoulders of a giant. And every decade or so, maybe 3 times a decade, the club has said, you know, we have to rebrand. We have to relabel ourselves. We have to, because people just don't relate to a Baird Ornithological Club. But because he was that giant, we always come to our senses and go, no, we need to keep Baird here. And the reason why Baird is so important is how he influenced people who came after him in Reading. Levi Mengele, another great name that has come into is sort of fading from our memories, but he founded the Reading Public Museum. He was a teacher in the Reading School District, and that's how the Reading Public Museum became, you know, part of the Reading School District. Spencer Baird was an influence on Levi Mengele. And Levi Mengele, just as Baird corresponded with John James Audubon, Mengele corresponded with Baird. And one of the great moments in Mengele's life, he writes about in his unpublished autobiography. And in it he wrote, "Well do I recollect the first time I ever saw Professor Spencer F. Baird. The Baird family had some real estate interests in Reading. My father was the attorney for the family. Many years ago, when I was yet a little boy, one day we had a great guest for dinner. Can anyone picture my awe and amazement when I gazed across the table and beheld the great Professor Baird? I was almost afraid to breathe. It is beyond my telling how this kindly man smiled at me and talked to me. After dinner, I ventured to ask him about some mineral or other. He evinced a desire to see my poor collection of stones. Patiently and seemingly with great interest, he looked over what I had. He told me what my unknown things were, unlabeled except for the locality from whence they came. He praised my efforts and encouraged me to keep on. He emphasized the importance of a label. He said a specimen without a locality label was useless. A scientific man could always determine what a specimen was, but that the locality from whence it came was the most important item. He made a lasting impression. And it is the locality from whence he came, Reading, that gives us that lasting impression. I mean, we can make all sorts of metaphors. We can talk about labels, you know, and specimens. But I just want to point out it's that scientific importance of place, of being from someplace, Reading. Mengele writes, continues, a week or two after he had made the visit, no one could imagine the delight and unbounded happiness when a large-sized box came to me from the Smithsonian Institution, filled to the full with good typical specimens of minerals. Many years have passed. Spencer Baird has long since died. His monumental influence and prodigious efforts are felt in every country in the world, but it would need none of these to remind me of that patient attention he gave to a little boy in the long ago. A friendship was begun, which ended only in his death. He is one of the shining stars in my heavenly firmament. Now, Levi Mengele founded and built the Reading Public Museum, our very own mini Smithsonian institution. Many tens of thousands of Reading school children have gone through the Reading Public Museum. Mengele believed in the power of a visual education. He would teach his students, he would bring coins from the Roman Empire to his students so they could handle it and get the idea of what it was like to handle, to live in those eras. And we see in the Reading Public Museum the art, just like in the Smithsonian, the art, the culture, the science, the local biology. He brought Earl Poole, the world-class ornithologist and wildlife artist, to the museum in 1916, and Poole founded the Baird Ornithological Club in 1921. He went on to mentor such people like Sam Gundy, who became the third director of the public museum after Mengele and Poole, and Gundy mentored Matt Spence, who went on to teach at Reading High, Bob Cook, who mentored Jack Holcomb, who still celebrated 65 years of broadcasting on the radio. He still broadcasts and talks about birds on his show. He mentored Jim Brett, who became the third curator at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. And Jim Brett internationalized the Hawk Mountain mission of raptor conservation to Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And Gundy also influenced, mentored Scott Weidensaul, who just recently published his latest book on bird migration. Truly, we are looking at the shoulders of a giant. And Spencer Baird continues to inspire us and to set an example for us. As Lonnie Walker IV aptly said, what just a kid from Reading can accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I hope all of you, as you're freezing because of the wind, I hope you really can think about how lucky you are to be citizens of Reading and Berks County, to have all these famous people here who started out and then became known all over the world. Let's move on now to our unveiling. I'm not sure. Amy? Go ahead, Donna. You take charge. Lucy, you want to come? Oh, going to do Strong first. Okay, we're just going to walk half a block down to Mr. Strong's marker by the church and then come back up. Eddie, are you frozen? Huh? Are you frozen yet? Oh, man, I'm feeling it. You want to?
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and I'll give you my card before you leave.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Where are we going? You don't realize what a man he was.
Dr. Curry, we're going to go down the block?
Yes.
Thank you for your remarks.
Thanks a lot.
And the history that you're speaking about, you're so important to us. I'm the person And the Historical Society might as well, but this man does
Okay, hold on for a second. Hold on. Jeff, we need to get that. Let's get you guys all there. Oh, my God. She's cracking.